Emma walked slowly toward the small cottage. Her fingers wrapped tightly around the old rusty key. The metal felt cold in her hand, just like the empty feeling in her heart. 3 months had passed since Grandma Rose died in her sleep, and the house had been sitting empty ever since. That morning, Emma had begged her mother to come with her. "I can't do this alone, Mom," she had whispered, fighting back tears. There are too many memories in that house. But her mother Helen was still crying every day about losing Rose. She could not bear to step foot in the cottage where so many happy times had happened. So here was Emma, only 17 years old, standing alone in front of the place that used to feel like magic. Without her grandmother's warm hugs and gentle words, Emma felt completely lost in the world. Everything seemed grey and empty now. She looked at the front garden and sighed deeply. Weeds had taken over everywhere. The flowers were gone and tall. Grass grew wild where beautiful roses used to bloom. Emma remembered how Grandma Rose would spend hours out here, getting her hands dirty with rich black soil. She would always hum old songs while she worked, the same tune she had learned as a little girl. Emma pushed the key into the lock and turned it slowly. The door opened with a soft creak. As soon as she stepped inside, familiar smells filled her nose: lavender soap and old books, exactly like it had always been. The house felt so quiet without her grandmother's cheerful voice calling out greetings. She walked through the tiny living room, running her fingers along the back of the old sofa where she used to sit and listen to stories. Everything was exactly the same, but everything felt different too. Emma made her way to the kitchen, where she had learned to bake bread and make tea. Through the kitchen window, she could see into the backyard. Her heart sank when she saw what it looked like now. The back garden was like a jungle. Tall weeds and wild grass had grown so high that she could barely see the ground. It looked nothing like the neat, colorful garden she remembered from her childhood visits, but something made Emma want to go outside anyway. She opened the back door and stepped into the overgrown mess. The grass came up to her knees in some places. As she walked carefully through the weeds, something unusual caught her attention. There were small wooden stakes sticking up from the ground here and there. Each one had writing on it, but the words were faded from months of rain and sun. Emma's heart began to beat faster. She knelt down in the tall grass and pushed away the weeds from around the first stake. When she could finally read the words clearly, her breath caught in her throat. In her grandmother's careful, neat handwriting, it said, "Sunflowers for my dear Emma's bright smile." Emma felt like someone had hit her in the chest. With shaking hands, she moved to the next woodland stake and cleared away more weeds. This one read, "Roses, red for love, pink for gratitude." Tears started rolling down Emma's cheeks, but she kept searching. Each plant marker had a message written just for her. Lavender, to bring peace to troubled hearts. Strawberries, sweet treats for my sweet girl. Herbs, for cooking together and making memories. This was not just an old abandoned garden. This was something incredible that Grandma Rose had planned and created specially for Emma. Every single plant had been chosen with love and care. Emma crawled through the weeds on her hands and knees, finding more and more markers. Near the old oak tree at the back of the garden, she discovered something that made her gasp out loud. Hidden beneath some fallen leaves was a small wooden box wrapped carefully in plastic to keep it safe from the weather. Her hands were shaking as she unwrapped the plastic and opened the box. Inside was a leather journal with a soft brown cover. The pages were filled with her grandmother's beautiful handwriting. Emma opened to the first page and began to read. "My dearest Emma," the words said, "if you are reading this, then you have found my secret garden. I planted every seed with love for you. hoping that one day, when I am no longer here to hold you, this garden will hold you instead. Emma's vision blurred with tears, but she kept reading. I know that losing me will hurt your heart, but I want you to know that love never really dies. It just changes into different forms. My love for you is now growing in this soil, blooming in these flowers, and living in every seed that takes root. Emma closed the journal and pressed it against her chest. She sat down right there in the middle of the overgrown grass and let herself cry. But these tears felt different from all the crying she had done since the funeral. These were not just tears of sadness and loneliness. For the first time in 3 months, Emma felt something besides emptiness. She felt discovery. She felt connection. She felt the amazing love that her grandmother had left waiting for her to find. Like a treasure hidden in the earth, the garden was a mess now. But Emma could see what it was meant to become. And suddenly, she knew exactly what she had to do. Emma woke up early on Saturday morning with a feeling she had not had in months, for the first time since Grandma Rose died. She felt excited about something. She packed her small backpack carefully with gardening gloves, a little shovel, and the precious leather journal that had changed everything for her dot all week long. Emma had read every single page of her grandmother's journal. She learned about each plant and why Grandma Rose had picked it for the garden. Every flower and herb had been chosen for a special reason, and every reason was connected to Emma's life and memories. Emma arrived at the cottage just as the morning sun was starting to warm the earth. She opened the journal to one of her favorite pages and read out loud to the empty garden. The lavender bush goes by the front gate. Its scent will welcome visitors and calm troubled hearts. Just like a grandmother's hug should do, she smiled, as she remembered something important. Grandma Rose had always smelled like lavender when she gave hugs. Emma had thought it was just her soap or perfume, but now she understood the truth. The smell came from hours and hours spent working with these plants, getting the sweet scent on her hands and clothes. Emma put on her gardening gloves and began pulling weeds away from the lavender bush near the front gate. The plant looked sad and forgotten, but she could see new green growth trying to push through. As she worked, she heard footsteps on the gravel path. "You must be Rose's granddaughter," said a kind voice behind her. Emma turned round to see an older man standing by the fence. He had grey hair and gentle eyes that reminded her a little bit of her grandmother. He looked like someone who had lived a long, good life. "Yes, I'm Emma," she said, pulling off one of her dirty gloves to shake his hand. "Are you the neighbor who lives next door?" "That's me. I'm William. I've lived in that house for 30 years now," he said with a warm smile. "Your grandmother talked about you every single day. She was so proud of you." Emma felt her heart flutter with surprise. She did. "What kinds of things did she say?" Mr. Williams' eyes got soft and happy, like he was remembering something beautiful. "She always said you were going to be something very special in this world. She was planning this garden for you for such a long time. Even when she started getting sick last year, she would still come out here every morning to water the plants and talk to them." Emma felt her throat get tight with sadness. She was sick. "I didn't know that. She didn't want anyone to worry about her," Mr. Williams said gently. "She just kept taking care of everything and everyone, right up until the end. She used to tell me that plants grow much better when you talk to them and tell them they are loved." I think she was right about that. Emma had to wipe tears from her eyes. Her grandmother had been suffering, but she had never complained or asked for help. She had just kept giving love to everyone round her, including these plants that were meant for Emma. She planted that rosemary bush over in that corner, Mr. Williams said, pointing across the garden. She told me that rosemary was for remembrance. She said that every time you smell it, you would remember how much she loved you and how proud she was to be your grandmother. Emma walked slowly over to the rosemary bush and knelt down beside it. She touched the small, grey-green leaves very gently, and immediately the strong, fresh smell filled the air around her. The scent brought back a flood of happy memories that made her feel warm inside. She remembered Sunday dinners at her grandmother's little kitchen table. Grandma Rose would make roasted chicken with crispy skin, and it was always seasoned with fresh herbs that she had picked from her garden. The smell of rosemary had filled the whole house on those special days. I remember, Emma whispered to the plant, just like her grandmother used to do, "I remember everything, and I love you too." Emma spent the rest of the morning working in different parts of the garden. She found a place where strawberries had grown the year before. The journal entry said, "Sweet treats from my sweet girl." She discovered markers for basil, thyme, and mint with a note that said, "For cooking together and making memories in the kitchen." Every plant marker she uncovered brought back another beautiful memory of time spent with her grandmother. By the time the afternoon sun was high in the sky, Emma had cleared away weeds from a small section of the garden. It was not very much, but now she could see something amazing. The whole garden was designed in the shape of a heart. Right in the middle was a small wooden bench where someone could sit and look at all the flowers and herbs growing round them. Emma sat down on that bench and felt like her grandmother was sitting right there beside her. She opened the journal to a page she had saved for this special moment. "My dear Emma," it said, "I know that losing me will hurt your heart very much, but I want you to understand something important. Love never really dies. It just changes into a different form. My love for you is now growing in this soil and blooming in these flowers. When you take care of this garden, you are taking care of the love between us, and that love will help you grow into the wonderful person you're meant to be." Emma closed the journal and looked round at everything she had accomplished. In just one morning, for the first time since her grandmother died, she felt like she had a purpose and a direction in her life. 3 weeks had gone by since Emma first discovered her grandmother's secret garden. Every single day after school, she had walked to the cottage with her backpack full of gardening tools. She had worked so hard to clear away all the weeds, and now the garden looked much cleaner than before. But Emma was starting to realize that clearing weeds was the easy part. Emma stood in the middle of the garden on a grey afternoon, feeling more frustrated than she had ever felt in her life. Her hands were covered in dirt. Her back was sore from bending over, and she felt like crying. She had been trying for weeks to plant new seeds where the old plants had died. But nothing was working the way it should. The soil was causing her so many problems. In some places, it was as hard as concrete, and she could barely dig holes with her small shovel. In other places, the ground was so wet and soggy that water stood in puddles for days after it rained. Many of the plants that her grandmother had originally planted were too damaged and dead to be saved. No matter how much Emma tried to help them, this is completely hopeless. Emma said out loud to the empty garden. She threw her small shovel down on the ground in defeat and felt hot tears starting to build up behind her eyes. Emma's mother Helen had been getting more and more worried about her every day. That morning at breakfast, Helen had asked the same question she asked every day. "When are you going to stop playing in the dirt and start focusing on your school exams?" Helen would say with a worried frown on her face. Emma was in her final year of school, which meant her exams were very important for her future. But she had been spending every free moment at the garden instead of studying, and her grades were getting worse and worse. Her teachers had started sending notes home to her mother about missed assignments and poor test scores. "Emma, love, you need to face the truth. Her mother had said that very morning while Emma was putting on her gardening clothes, Grandma Rose is gone forever. And this garden is just making you more sad every day. Maybe it's time to stop trying and let go of this impossible dream. But Emma could not let go, no matter what her mother said. This garden was the only thing that made her feel close to her grandmother anymore. It was her special connection to all the love and memories they had shared together. She was determined to make it bloom again, even if it killed her trying. The biggest problem was that Emma had no idea what she was actually doing. Her grandmother's beautiful leather journal was full of loving messages and wonderful thoughts about each plant, but it did not explain the practical things that Emma desperately needed to know. How often should she water each type of plant? Why was the soil so different in various parts of the garden? When was the right time of year to plant different kinds of seeds? The worst thing had happened just last week. Emma had managed to grow some tiny green seedlings from seeds she had planted with great care. She had been so excited and proud when she saw the first little green leaves poking up through the soil. But then the late frost came one night when she was not expecting it. The next morning, Emma had arrived at the garden to find all her baby plants brown and dead, killed by the cold. Emma had sat down right there in the dirt and cried for a whole hour. It felt like losing her grandmother all over again. "I'm so sorry, Grandma," she had whispered to the quiet garden round her. "I'm trying as hard as I can. But I don't know how to do this without you here to help me. Double quotes now." Sitting on the old wooden bench in the center of the garden, Emma put her head down in her hands and wondered if she should give up. Maybe her mother was right. Maybe she was just a 17-year-old girl with no experience who was trying to do something that was impossible for someone like her. Just when Emma felt like she could not feel any more discouraged, she heard the sound of footsteps walking on the gravel path that led to the garden. She looked up and saw her neighbor Mr. William coming toward her. He was carrying a steaming cup of tea in his hands, and his kind face looked concerned about her. "I thought you might need this," Mr. William said in his gentle voice. He held out the warm cup to Emma, and she could smell that it was sweet tea, with milk, just the way her grandmother used to make it. Emma took the cup gratefully and wrapped her cold hands round it. "Thank you so much, Mr. William. But I think I'm ready to give up on this whole thing. I've been trying for weeks and weeks, and nothing is working right. Everything I touch just dies. I'm no good at this." Mr. William sat down on the bench beside her and was quiet for a moment, looking round at the garden. Then he smiled and said something that surprised Emma very much. "Your grandmother failed many times too when she first started learning about gardening. I remember one year when she tried to grow tomatoes in this very garden. Every single plant died before it could make even one tomato. She was so discouraged that she almost gave up gardening forever," and looked at him with wide eyes. "Really? Grandma Rose failed at gardening?" "Oh yes, many times," Mr. Williams said with a chuckle. "But the next year she tried growing tomatoes again. And the year after that too. Each time something went wrong. She learned something new about how to do it better. That's the real secret of gardening, Emma. It's not about getting everything perfect the first time you try. It's about never giving up and learning something from every mistake you make." Emma looked round at the struggling garden with completely new eyes. Maybe all her failures were not signs that she should quit. Maybe they were just part of how people learn to become good gardeners, Mr. William. Emma said hesitantly, "Would you be willing to help me? I don't want to bother you, but I don't know anyone else who might know about gardening." Double quotes. Mr. William's whole face lit up with a warm, happy smile. "It would be my greatest honor to help you, Emma. Your grandmother would be so proud to see you fighting this hard for something you believe in." When spring finally arrived, Emma felt like the whole world was waking up from a long, cold sleep. The air was warmer, the days were longer, and for the first time in months, Emma felt real hope growing in her heart. Best of all, she was no longer trying to save her grandmother's garden all by herself. William had become like a grandfather to her, teaching her everything he knew about plants and soil and growing things. Every day after school, Emma would find him waiting for her at the garden with a cup of tea and a new lesson to share. Gardening is just like life, he told her one sunny afternoon as they knelt together in the dirt, planting tiny seeds in neat rows. You need good, rich soil to start with. You need to give everything plenty of clean water. And most importantly, you need to have lots and lots of patience. But the most important thing of all is that you have to believe that beautiful things can grow even in the darkest and most difficult places. Emma had been listening carefully to all of Mr. Williams' advice, and amazing things were starting to happen in the garden. The lavender bush by the front gate was growing new purple-green, leaves that smelled wonderful when she touched them. Tiny green shoots were poking up through the soil in all the places where they had planted fresh seeds together. Word about Emma's special project had spread all through the neighborhood, and people had started coming by to see what she was doing. Some of them just wanted to look and ask questions, but many others wanted to help make the garden beautiful again. Mrs. Margaret, who lived in the yellow house down the street, came by one morning carrying a small paper bag. Inside were packets of flower seeds that had belonged to her husband before he died 2 years ago. Her eyes were wet with tears as she handed them to Emma. My dear husband would have wanted these seeds to grow in Rosa's garden, Mrs. Margaret said in a soft voice. He always said that the best way to remember someone you love is to plant something beautiful that will bloom every year. A few days later, Tom from across the street knocked on the garden gate. Tom was about Emma's age, but she had never really talked to him before. He was usually inside playing video games on his computer. My mum says I need to spend less time staring at screens and more time outside in the fresh air, Tom said with a big grin on his face. This seems like a good place to start helping out. I'm pretty strong, so I can help you move heavy things like rocks and bags of soil. Emma was so happy to have Tom's help. There were many jobs in the garden that were too hard for her to do alone. Together, they moved large stones to build neat borders round the flower beds. Tom also helped her dig deeper holes for the bigger plants that needed more room for their roots to grow. The biggest surprise came one evening when Emma was watering the seedlings she had planted the week before. She heard footsteps on the path and looked up to see her mother Helen walking toward her. Helen was carrying a thermos full of hot tea and a plate of homemade biscuits that smelled like butter and sugar. I've been thinking a lot about what you said to me, Helen said as they sat together on the wooden bench in the center of the garden, about how working in this garden makes you feel close to Mom. I was so worried about moving on with our lives that I forgot something important. Sometimes we need to take time to honor the people we love who are no longer with us. Emma felt her heart fill up with happiness. She reached over and squeezed her mother's hand gently. Would you like to help me plant something special? There's a section over there where Grandma wanted to grow daffodils. I read in her journal that daffodils were your favorite flowers when you were little. Girl, Helen's eyes filled with tears, but they were good tears this time. She nodded and smiled. I would love that more than anything in the world. As the warm spring weeks went by, the garden became much more than just Emma's personal project. It turned into a special gathering place for everyone who lived nearby. People would stop by almost every day to chat with Emma while she worked. They would share their own happy memories of Grandma Rose and give Emma helpful advice about taking care of different kinds of plants. Mrs. Margaret taught Emma how to make rich compost from leftover food scraps like banana peels and coffee grounds. Tom helped build a small water fountain using pretty stones they found around the neighborhood. Mr. William showed Emma how to create a spiral-shaped herb garden that would fit perfectly in one corner of the yard. Emma's mother started visiting the garden regularly too. She even brought some of her own mother's old recipe books and started planning which herbs she would need to cook Grandma Rose's favorite dishes. "Soon we'll have our own fresh basil and thyme growing right here," Helen said with a proud smile one warm evening, as Emma was giving water to all the newly planted seedlings. She noticed something that made her heart jump with excitement. The rosemary bush that had been looking sick and dying for so many weeks suddenly had bright new growth sprouting from its branches. The lavender plants were growing fat purple buds that would soon open into beautiful flowers. Even the strawberry patch was showing its first tiny white blossoms. Emma opened her grandmother's precious journal to write down all the wonderful progress that was happening. As she turned the pages, she discovered something amazing that she had never seen before. There was an extra page tucked between two others that she had somehow missed. "My dearest Emma," the hidden page said, "I hope that by the time you read these words, you have learned the most important lesson that gardens can teach us. We never grow anything truly beautiful by working alone. We grow the most wonderful things with love, patience, community, and faith in the future. The most beautiful gardens in the world are always the ones that are cared for by many different hands and many loving hearts, all working together towards something wonderful." Emma looked round at the garden that had become so much more than she had ever dreamed possible. It was no longer just her garden anymore. It belonged to everyone who had helped bring it back to life. And she finally understood that one whole year had passed in her grandmother's first discovered her grandmother's secret garden, and now she stood in the very center of it on a beautiful warm summer morning. She could hardly believe what her eyes were seeing. The place that had once been nothing but tall weeds and broken dreams was now like a piece of heaven on earth, full of amazing colors and the sweetest smells. The sunflowers were so tall that Emma had to look up to see their bright yellow faces. They stood proud and strong, turning to follow the morning sun across the sky, just like the old plant marker had promised, from my dear Emma's bright smile. The rose bushes were covered with so many blooms that Emma could barely see the green leaves. Underneath, red roses for love and pink roses for gratitude filled the air with a smell so sweet it made her feel dizzy with happiness. The lavender bushes were alive with the sound of busy bees humming and buzzing as they collected nectar from the purple flowers. The herb spiral that Mr. William had helped her build was overflowing with fresh basil, thyme, rosemary, and mint. Everything was so green and healthy and full of life. Today was the most special day of the whole year for Emma. She was having a big celebration to honor her grandmother. Exactly 1 year after she had first found the garden hidden under all those weeds, Emma had invited every single person in the neighborhood, and people were already starting to arrive carrying plates of homemade cookies and flowers they had picked from their own gardens to share. Emma's mother Helen came out of the cottage carrying a wooden tray loaded with cups of tea and fresh biscuits. The biscuits had been made with herbs that Emma had grown herself in the garden. Helen looked happier and more at peace than Emma had seen her since the day Grandma Rose had died. "Are you ready for this big day, love?" Helen asked as she set the tray down on the small table they had placed next to the wooden bench in the center of the garden. Emma nodded and pulled her grandmother's precious leather journal out of her pocket. Her hands were shaking a little bit with excitement and nervousness. I have something very special that I want to read to everyone today. I found one last entry in Grandma's journal that I've been saving just for this moment. People began gathering in the garden, finding places to sit on blankets spread on the grass or standing in small groups among the flowers. Emma felt her heart fill up with so much gratitude that she thought it might burst. Mr. William was there, of course, with the biggest smile on his face as he looked round at how beautiful everything had become. Mrs. Margaret had brought her grown-up daughter and her 3 grandchildren to see the amazing garden. Tom was there with his parents, who kept saying how surprised they were that their son had learned so much about plants and growing things. "Thank you all so much for coming here today," Emma began, speaking in a voice that was strong but full of emotion. "1 year ago, I thought I had lost my grandmother forever and ever. I felt so alone in the world and so angry that she had to leave me. But then I discovered this incredible garden. And I learned something that changed my whole life and opened the journal to the very last page, the one she had been keeping as a special surprise for this day. Her hands were still shaking, but her voice was clear and strong. "This is what my grandmother wrote in her final entry," Emma said, looking round at all the dear faces of people who had become like a second family to her. She wrote, "My precious Emma, if you are reading these words, it means that the garden has taught you its greatest and most important secret. Love is not something that we lose when the people we care about die. Love is something that grows bigger and stronger. It grows in the kindness of neighbors who offer to help when we need it most. It grows in the patience we learn while we take care of tiny seedlings. It grows in the community that forms when people come together to create something beautiful." Emma stopped reading for a moment and looked round at everyone gathered in the garden. She saw Mr. William wiping tears from his eyes. She saw Mrs. Margaret holding her granddaughter's hand. She saw Tom standing next to his parents, all of them smiling with joy. She saw her mother Helen looking proud and peaceful for the first time in so long. "My grandmother also wrote," Emma continued, "you see, my dear girl, I planted this garden not just with seeds and soil, but with faith. Faith that you would find your way from sadness to happiness. Faith that you would discover how strong and capable you really are. Faith that you would learn what took me many years to understand. That we are never truly alone in this world as long as we open our hearts to love and let other people help us." Emma closed the journal and looked round at the garden that had brought so many people together. The afternoon sun was warm on her face, and she could hear the bees still humming in the lavender. Children were laughing as they ran between the flower beds, and adults were sharing stories and recipes while they enjoyed the food everyone had brought. "My grandmother planted this garden for me," Emma said with tears of happiness in her eyes. "But all of you helped it grow. You helped me grow too. This garden belongs to every single one of us now, and it always will." As the celebration continued into the evening, Emma sat on the bench with her mother and watched all the people she loved enjoying the beautiful space they had created together. She finally understood that her grandmother's greatest gift had not been the garden itself, but the lesson that love never really ends. It just grows in new and wonderful ways.